It's a totally different year this year without, we had an 8th grade class. We just say that they were the pre-stroll group that I only got to have 2 years with them. So now they're gone. Why is this transcribing? What in the? Okay, I don't know why transcribing is working, but whatever. Whatever. All right. Well, thank y'all seriously for taking this time to help me with this. It's very interesting. I've been doing a lot of reading. I mean, I'll be honest, Dan, there are a lot of times when you've shared information and I literally am like, what are you talking about? But I actually found that stuff about like the super pennies. And remember when we did all the super penny stuff?
I do remember that.
It made a little more sense. Yeah, he's like, oh, definitely do. It's making a little bit more sense, but I'll be honest, there's a lot of terminology here that I don't know, am not familiar with. So let me pull up my screen. I know you guys were in the questions.
Yeah.
I don't know if I need to turn off Outlook, probably. Okay. All right. If I do that, oops. Oh, brother. Now I started downloading stuff. Hang on. Okay. Can you see my screen or no?
Yep.
It's been a while since we've done
You can
this.
see us on your screen.
Okay, well, what do you see? Can you see the questions?
Now you're. Are you moving it some more? Because right now I can see me and Dan. There we go.
Can you see that?
Yep.
All right. Is my face still in the thingy? Because I think when I record it, it's supposed to be like you're supposed to see me.
You can see half of your face.
Okay, well, I'll sit up taller. How's that?
There.
Is that better?
A little bit more.
Which way, left or right?
Let's see. It would be your right.
Like
I
this?
can see you.
There you go.
Is that better? How's that?
Right there.
Okay, good. Oh my gosh, guys, so sorry. Okay, so I already put that in there. Did you already answer? Did you guys already go through there and fill this out? Oh my gosh. Okay, so basically, let's just start off with the first one, the new tax revenue and how it relates to the educational financial structure.
Well, the reality is it doesn't really make a difference when it comes to how much the district can earn. It just basically helps determine how much our local taxpayers are going to pay versus what the state's going to pay. But in essence, what it's attempting to do is, let's just say you get your tax bill for last year, and your property values go up for the next year based on value growth. The no new tax rate would be whatever the rate would need to be to generate the same amount of money that your bill generated last year. So let's say $100,000 house, you had a 10-cent tax rate that generated a certain amount of money. So you look at, let's say it's $100. What would it take based on your new values? Let's say your values went up to 120,000. What would your rate need to be in order for you to generate the same $100? So it's essentially trying to figure out for the local taxpayer, how much more money are we getting, or what would the rate need to be in order to generate the same amount of money as last year based on the new values. So if values go down, it would actually be the inverse. You'd have to have a higher rate to generate the same amount of money for the district for taxes. And so that's what it's attempting to do. The way it plays into school finance is it just simply is one of the factors that's disclosed in our notice. It's not necessarily even really used for determining the rate. The Texas Education Agency uses pieces of it. So a lot of this is related to counties and cities more so than school districts. But since we are a government entity, we do get lumped into having to provide that information to our taxpayers. But it's really a more of informational purposes, and helps with determining what TEA will ultimately approve as our tax rate. Because believe it or not, TEA actually is the one that says yay or nay on the tax rate.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't know.
With House Bill 3, that changed where
Okay.
they take our information based on values, and determine what our maximum compressed rate will have to be. If we go above that, we have 5 super pennies that we can add to it. Anything above that would require the voters to approve it, which is what we used to call the TRE, tax rate election. Now it's called I think it's called something else now. Voter authorized what is it? VT. I forgot the name of it, but it's called, essentially you have to go out for voter approval for an amount above what your maximum compressed rate plus your allowed super pennies.
Okay. So when you say the new tax revenue, it changes, right, based on what you need to have versus what you have. Is that something you have to post? Like, this is our new tax revenue for this school year, or does it just fluctuate?
Yep. So each year, once we get our certified values from Harris County, we send that to the tax office for them to complete the truth in taxation worksheets, which includes the no new revenue. So you may hear it also known as TNT, truth in taxation. So that is the process that's used each year. And so it's all based on the values that have been certified. And then the tax office works with those figures. We provide them with our updated state funding template, which is based on our anticipated enrollment and attendance rate and student populations, and then provide them with our voter approved debt that's going to be required to be paid, the principal and interest for the year, and then they do the worksheets from there, and then they provide them to us for review. They also do the notice, which we oftentimes have to work with them on that because it's a confusing notice because again, it's the words, it says we're increasing the tax rate, but we're actually oftentimes decreasing the tax rate. So the wording is flawed currently. And so something that really needs to be addressed. So we always have to clarify for the board what they're actually adopting. They're adopting something that typically generates more tax revenue, but the rate maybe is oftentimes going down. So we do have to clarify that, but there's very specific language we have to utilize in these notices and in the adoption of the tax rate.
So do we know what the new tax revenue, what that rate is for this school year?
Should get it Thursday or Friday of this week.
What was it last year? Do you know, Dan?
I can pull the notice. Yeah, I can pull the notice
and is that posted? Is that somewhere right? Because I did go to the website, looked at like the financial transparency, went through all those different things.
It was on there. It was on there, but we just had a update to our website, and mysteriously things are gone.
Oh.
So we're having to repost.
Oh no. Oh no. Well, darn.
But I can pull I can get the notice and attach it here as well. Okay.
Thanks, Dan. So when we look at what the state provides in terms of aid, what amount, is that a percentage? Is that like the state provides 47% of the budget for what we receive versus local?
Yeah, for last, if you go to page 9 of that link document, there's several years worth, and you can see how it does fluctuate.
Mhm.
over time. And for 23-24, actually for 22-23 school year, it was about 48%
Mhm.
local and 48.7% state. And then we had a little bit of federal dollars that we have in general fund as well.
Not very much.
Yeah, we do get other federal funds. It's just not recorded in the general fund. Most of the federal grants require separate reporting, and so we have to have a separate fund for those, which include your Title I, your special ed, your IDEA, your Carl
Mhm.
Perkins, your ESSER funds. All those were separate funds outside the general fund, but there are some things like MAC and SHARS, I believe, are recorded in general fund. We have indirect costs that are recorded in general fund. And so there's a small amount of federal funds that are recorded in general, but the rest of it is in a separate fund. The child nutrition is a totally separate fund as well, and that's a lot of that is federally funded. But
Okay.
we had anticipated the share to shift some more because of rising property values. So you see in 23-24, we were seeing that we were anticipating local property taxes to account for 51%.
Mhm.
And our state was going to reduce their contribution because since it did not increase the amount of funding per student, if we receive more money from our property taxpayers, that means the state simply has to fill in a smaller amount of the overall funding cup. And so, but with the Senate Bill 2, which recently passed, with the largest property tax cuts ever in the state of Texas, that is going to compress our tax rate by a significant amount, about 19 cents. And so that on top of the homestead exemption that is being added potentially from November, based on the November election, November 2023, the voters will have to consider it. It will increase the homestead exemption from 40,000 to 100,000, and so
Oh, wow.
that will then increase the state share significantly and
Mhm.
reduce the local share. But the overall, the district still isn't receiving any more overall money. It's just who's paying for it is changing,
Mhm.
and so you can see it does fluctuate a little bit over time, and really before 1920, that was the House Bill 3 year. It was really disproportionate. I think it was over 50% local, and I think statewide, I think it was nearly 60% local and under like 38% state, which is why House Bill 3, and one of the things they were doing through that
Mm.
bill was trying to balance it back out, because over time, I think they're trying to get it about 50-50, but it was out of whack for a while.
Interesting. Okay, so we've talked about what determined that change. Like, really, if you take from A, you have to supplement with B, and if you don't get enough from B, you have to supplement from A. But it sounds like they tend to err on the side of let's just put more back on for the local. But now with this homestead exemption changing and taxes being reduced, that the state's going to have to step up, right, and find a way to supplement.
Well, the main driver of it is property values. So
Mhm.
since property values have grown at a faster pace than what the state has increased our funding formulas,
Mhm.
it's created this situation. So
Mhm.
and the state had benefited from that because for 22-23 and 21-22, values grew so quickly, the state share kept dropping, and so that created this monster surplus that
Mhm.
they're sitting on, and basically they're just giving the money that they benefited from back to the taxpayers through tax compression. So to say that they're giving big property tax cuts right after the biggest increase ever. So I mean, it's like
Right. They just
giving you
have it in
a discount
excess.
off of MSRP.
Jeez Louise. But it's how they sell it, right? Because
Yeah.
people who are uneducated regarding the whole process is like, oh, our state is so benevolent. Look at all the things they're giving back to us. And in
Right.
reality, it's like they already took it from you. So,
The reality is property values drive the bulk of everything. And so there's a big incentive for property values to go up, but yet there's always a constant narrative of they're too high.
right.
But it's one of those things that it does benefit a lot of the entities that are complaining about it.
So how do districts that are in low income areas, like how does that affect their budget and the amount that they have? Does the state have to put more forward to supplement
So if
versus
it,
like, go ahead.
so it all comes down to how you earn it. So all districts earn very similarly. We earn based on serving students. If you're in an area that has a low property value, and so they're property poor, then the state is simply putting in more money for those districts. So they're split maybe only 20% local taxes and 80% state aid. There are some districts that are chapter they're considered property wealthy districts. They actually don't get any state aid. They pay money back to the state.
Wow.
And so it's all comes down to, how you earn it and then who's paying for it. Austin ISD is a property wealthy school district. And so they're paying money back to the state, and the state is supposed to be redistributing it to other districts. But the reality is it's just going back into their general fund pot that they could use however they want in the long run. But so the biggest thing is, it is a statewide property tax just levied through school districts, but the way they've gotten around it is that they force the local school boards to adopt a tax rate. So technically it's a local tax, but it's all controlled, everything except for the debt service side, which is the bonds piece of it. That is locally voter approved. The 5 cents that we have for super pennies, that was locally determined, but everything else in the tax rate is determined based on the state, and is tied to that formula. So the fact that it is the way it is and not considered a state property tax is, it's ridiculous that it hasn't been determined to be one.
Yeah, doesn't really make much sense. I'm just gonna say that. Okay, let's talk about ESSER. So thank you for linking in 1, 2, and 3. I probably could have found that. I've been like, I'll just go look for it. I didn't really, honestly, wasn't familiar with the difference between the 3 options. So for our purposes for Klein, we have all 3 of these in place. 1, 2, and 3, and like for me,
1 is done. 2 is actually done as well. We have a little bit of 3 remaining.
Okay, that makes sense.
And one was just a supplant. So back in 2020, whenever we did not return after spring break, the state did not pull our funding, even though we were not technically attending in person. But the state used this ESSER money ESSER 1 money to basically hold us harmless for that period from spring break to the end of school.
Okay.
And so that the state really just offset what they would have paid us and used the ESSER 1 money for that. So that was ESSER 1. ESSER 2 and 3 have been the ones that we've actually been able to utilize in the district to try to help students recover from learning loss.
Okay. Is that amount listed in that budget that you linked in? How much we have left? Is that something that's public knowledge or?
Yeah. Overall is about 110 million between all 3. Jason can probably drop in the numbers there for the 3 programs. One was about 72, one was 30 something, and the first one was 6.5, I believe, or 6.6, something like that. But we can drop in those numbers.
All right, thank you. Okay, I kind of feel like we just talked about the percentage of the budget that comes from federal, state, and local. Okay, revenues versus expenditures. Obviously, I know the difference between, and I was looking through, so I didn't see the 23-24 budget on the website, but,
It's
so I was
there
looking.
now.
Oh, it is, okay. I was looking at the 22-23 one and kind of just getting an idea, but it looked like we're about, is this correct, that for about 495, is that your number that you remember, or is that kind of a baseline? For like the general
Yeah,
revenue.
yeah,
And
that was our 20, looks like the link here also it is the 22-23, but yeah, that's pretty close. 21-22, that 495 was our actual audited number. The
okay,
adopted budget for 22-23 was about 499
okay.
499 million.
And then expenditures was the about 473.
Yeah, that was the actual audited one, and then
Okay.
the 22-23 budget was 512.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, it's not good to have revenues under
I know.
expenditure.
I was like, so a little bit over. Oops.
We typically run about a a little over 2% budget to actual variance. So, we budget the best we can, but we don't know specifically how many vacancies we're going to have throughout the year. We
Mm.
estimate based on prior years, but again, it does fluctuate. And then we also don't know for sure, if all funds will be expended by campuses and departments. And
Right.
so, $13 million is what we've seen over the last several years, budget to actual, and several normal years, budget to actual variances. And so even though we may have budgeted more expenditures than revenue, at the end of the day or end of the year, we're actually coming in slightly above, putting a little bit of money back into fund balance. So we've utilized ESSER in as many ways as possible to try to help the situation, just given the fact that things are costing a lot more. But we've been in good shape, but we've had a lot of help from federal funds to
Mhm.
accomplish that.
Absolutely. Do you foresee it being like, well, just a hardship when when that extra funding is gone? And I mean, I know we went through that right this year where we didn't have those ESSER funded positions anymore and having to like repurpose people. Would that account for some of the, like for this year's budget? Maybe we're gonna have more expenditures than revenue because we basically had to absorb, right, those people?
Yep. Yes, so we had one more Band-Aid to use. We had previously put about $28 million set aside for capital projects before the 2022 bond passed. We've strategically waited to move those funds back to the rainy day, and it's starting to. Well, we'd like some rain, but we'd like a
Well, that's
rain in
never
a
gonna
different.
happen, so.
Yeah, rain in a different way. But
Yeah,
it's about 28 million we're pulling back in to the general fund for this for 23-24 to help cover those one-time or those additional costs this year. And we've been saying all along that this was a roll off. We didn't want it to be a funding cliff. We wanted it to be more of a hill. And so we've knowing that, yes, your presumption is correct that we will have to take a look at how we're going to balance things out in the future with and not having those positions moving forward, or if those are the positions we really need, what other things can we reduce? It's always comes down to what's providing the best benefit for students, and if we can reduce something else and keep something else that is having a positive impact, then we can go that route as well. But without the state providing some significant support in October, which is what we've heard is when they're going to call the third special session. How convenient, right? In October.
Right. How convenient. What else is around that time?
Yeah, exactly. Also, teachers are back at work, so they're going to have a hard time being involved in that session. Whereas if they would have had it in the summer, it would have allowed them to have more input. So that's kind of a slap for them. But what we've heard is that there's going to be a third special session called in October, and school finance and school choice will, will be tied together in this session.
We do have that week that the campuses are off in October, so
True.
I wouldn't say drive the bus, Shannon, but you might tell people how to get to Austin.
Absolutely. We need to do something. This is messy. It's messy. All right, bonded in, I don't even know if I can say that word, indebtedness. Indebtedness? Is that how you say it? I don't know what that is. Indebtedness. Thank you, Dan. Indebtedness. What exactly is that, and where is the district sitting? So it's voter approved bonds.
Yeah, Jason, you want that one, Jason?
It's your domain, but I'll take it. So
I'll take
indebtedness, just that's us going out for a loan.
Okay.
So that is what those bonds do, is we are basically mortgaging either construction or technology or other things. And so we're going out for a loan for those, and then we pay those off with that INS tax rate over the next, some of them 5, 10, 15, 20 years as we tax over the years to do that.
Got it. So just like what we just did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Got a
And
big old loan.
Yeah. So it's investors, instead of going to the bank and getting a loan, it's investors putting capital up, and then we in turn pay them back with interest. We do have like large insurance companies that will buy our debt. They find it very secure. They like this. They like the security of knowing that they're going to get their principal and interest payments back, and that's why we're able to have such a low interest rate. We can get loans outside of the voter approved piece, but that would have to be paid back in the general fund. And so if we did just got a car loan through regular traditional means, then those would have to be repaid out of the general fund. But if we go this route, it allows us access to that additional taxing authority. And so that's why most districts are going in that manner. And so we can go up to 50 cents on the tax rate for debt service, or at least whenever you're calculating it, you have to meet the 50-cent threshold. And so that's something that we've been able to do. And most people frown upon the technology being in a bond because that's only a 3 to 5 year asset. Well,
right.
We do have to match up useful life. And so we have to make our repayment schedule match up with our usage. And so the first year of this sale, or the last 2 sales, has a large amount of principal being paid back in year 1. And so to help us match up with those short life assets.
Is there like a time frame of expectancy when that is repaid, or does it just continue to go on?
25 years.
25 years.
25
similar
years.
Similar to like your
years.
Mortgage.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can schedule them 5 or 10 or 15. 25 is kind of what the max is we've done here at Klein. But a lot of them, like Dan was saying, the principal will be paid off of some of them in the first 5 years. And so that way, when we spend those proceeds for technology, we've already paid the debt in that first 5 years, and we're done with
Mhm.
those. And so the longer term ones are for those renovations, new construction. We have series that pay off in 10 years, which may be vehicles and buses, even though I know we got some 20, 25-year-old buses out there too. So, but yeah, it is all part of like how you plan to spend it, and then how you kind of plan out the age and length of those bonds.
Okay. All right, fund balance. I think we kind of already talked about that, right? That's like the general fund, I'm assuming, that houses all of your expenditures and revenues, and that's kind of what I saw. Am I interpreting that correctly? The fund balance, the difference between governmental fund assets and deferred outflows of resources? Is that what I'm seeing?
The simple way to think of it is it's just the cumulative amount of revenue over expenditures since the beginning of time for Klein. So
Okay.
each year, if we didn't spend everything, or if our revenues exceeded our expenditures, then that goes into fund balance.
Okay.
If you have a year where you're spending more, then that's going to come out of fund balance. And so it's just really the leftover since the beginning of time. So
Got it.
in year one of Klein ISD, there was no fund balance because it was just starting off. But at the end of year one, if there was money left over, it went into fund balance. And so that's just the easiest way to think of it is just the cumulative revenues over expenditures since the beginning of Klein ISD. And for us, typically you want to have about 25% in fund balance, 25% of your next year's anticipated expenditures. And so that's the general rule of thumb. We shoot a little higher because we have a June 30th year in, meaning that we have 2 months that we're trying to operate that, we're not receiving cash flow from the state, and our majority of our property tax collections have already been collected. Your tax bill is due for your house is due January 31st. But we start operating school in August. And so there's some time there that we're having to cash flow payments to our employees and vendors. The state begins their contributions in, I believe, September. And so, the fund balance is really needed to allow for cash flow purposes so we're not having to borrow money ahead of time, waiting for collections to come in. And so it's really a cash flow tool that helps us get school started and then until such time as we start receiving our revenue.
It's kind of like your piggy bank.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Kinda.
just timing. It's school districts don't get paid an equal amount on the 15th or on the 5th and the 20th of every month. We get paid at random times throughout the year. And so, and then the start of school doesn't match up to that. And so you have to have working capital, basically cash, to be able to fund things whenever you're not receiving you haven't received your next year's allocations yet.
Got it.
But we don't call it a piggy bank because the state calls the state calls that their rainy day fund, and they're associating their rainy day fund to our fund balance. Well, a fund balance would be something that would be you are specifically saving up for maybe an intentional use at a later date. Whereas what we're using it for is really just a cash flow things, and it's really just more of a checking account versus a savings.
I get it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we already kind of talked about property tax system, how it's used for public education, how the values are assessed, how tax rates are assessed. We talked a little bit about House Bill 3, and I can kind of go and learn more about that on my own. You don't have to do that. Can you tell me about compressed tax rate versus rollback? Don't know what that is. Maybe I should.
So the compressed rate is, that's I guess it's really started back, was it 08, 09?
Oh, I don't know.
Where we're used to, we could do up to $1.50 in M&O tax rate.
Mhm.
I forgot what time frame it was, before 2010. The
Mhm.
state had districts begin compressing down to $1. So from $1.50 to $1. Again, this is 100% tied to values were growing. So they're saying the districts don't need as much rate. And the whole reason was because we were collecting it because of the value growth was there. And then the state said, well, in order for us to keep our share of the cost at 50%, we'll have to contribute the difference. But the bottom line is you have to compress your rate in order for that to trigger them to be able to contribute more, because the only other way for them to contribute more is for them to increase the amount of money that we receive per student, which
Okay.
they haven't been all that keen on that. I mean, they do it at times and they want to do it for specific things, but just general increases to the revenue per student hasn't been something that they've done very often. And so that's how the compressed theory came into play. They've done it now 2 more times. And so with Senate Bill 2 that just passed, basically anything above your compressed rate calculation plus your 5 super pennies, then would trigger a rollback. So you'd have to go out for it. If you try to adopt something greater than what your compressed rate plus 5 cents is, then you have to go out for a voter tax rate election. If that is not successful, the voters do not approve it, then you fall back to the rollback rate, which is what the rate would have been if the voters would not have approved it. Or yeah, the compressed rate plus 5. And so that is that's essentially what's happening with those items.
Okay.
And House Bill 3 did have a compression in there, and now Senate Bill, so 2 or 3, whatever, and the second special session has additional compression as well.
Wow.
And just
lots of
for your
obstacles.
other information, even though school districts do not appraise properties,
Mhm,
we have each county has a county appraisal district. The
mhm.
county appraisal district is following the rules set by the state comptroller. So
Oh.
here we have another state entity telling a local entity how to do their job, and they get audited on that. So if they do not follow the rules established by the state comptroller, who is governed by or is authorized by legislature, then they get penalized. So you can see that there's a lot of things that are pointing back to one
Yeah.
common denominator.
Yeah, it's like the state just runs everything, even though they
Yes,
say
ma'am.
like you're in charge of your own. Actually, you're not,
Yeah,
because I'm going
local-
to control all of
Local
this.
control at its finest. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So basically, the state comptroller can dictate whatever they want it to be, and
Well, they're
drive
following
that.
the rules. They're following the rules that have been provided to them by the state legislature.
Right. So there you go.
And then TEA is following the rules established by the state legislature. School districts are following the rules established by the state legislature. But the state legislature is the one complaining about how high taxes are.
There you go. You're literally like, well, go back and look in the mirror.
Yep. Hey, there you go. Look in the mirror.
Jeez Louise. All right. Oh my gosh, how many would I have? Okay. Your opinion on the last 3 years of property tax dollar amounts and their significance. I mean, obviously, we kind of talked about how that has fluctuated. I mean, it's been about the same over the last, I would say, 3 years. There hasn't been a huge percentage change.
And that's by design. House Bill 3 actually came up with a model that caps additional tax revenue to about 2.5%. So if you're looking at the numbers, it did work out pretty well, because what the state realized prior to House Bill 3 is that property tax revenue growth was extremely high, And that was requiring the state to contribute less, but it was putting a lot of pressure on local taxpayers. And so
Right.
part of the compressed rate calculations includes, again, the no new revenue calculation. That's with disclosure. But what's also in those calculations is what it was the district receiving or for existing property. So the property that was in existence the prior year and the same property this year, the state's trying to make it so that we're not collecting more than 2.5% more in taxes. Their values might have gone up by 10%.
Mhm.
But what that means is then the district would have to reduce our tax rate by 7.5% in order to get it back down to 2.5%. And those are just rough numbers, but that gives you an idea of how and why our rates been compressing over the last few years, is because values have grown, which would then require, in order for us to get down to that 2.5% revenue growth, the amount of money we actually collect, we have to reduce our rate to offset that value growth.
Jeez.
And so you might have, and that only applies to M&O. What we've, on the INS side, we could see we are allowed, based on whatever the voters have approved from bonded indebtedness, but we've been trying to manage the tax rate there too. That we've actually been able to decrease that side of the equation as well. But the primary driver is because value growths have been really strong.
Mhm. So when we look at our taxes, what we charge, I mean, I feel like they have been appropriate based on the needs of the district and looking at the constraints that are before us in terms of being able to adequately fund needs of the district as a whole. Do you feel like that is the case? How we're currently operating?
Yeah, I think our share is very appropriate. It's the state
Mhm.
share that needs to go up.
Right.
So the I guess again, it's thinking of that cup scenario where we have an 8-ounce cup that we earn per student, and who's filling that cup? Who's paying for that revenue? The state and local property taxpayers. But the problem that I've seen is that over time, the local taxpayer has actually seen increases, but the state's seen decreases.
Right.
And that's created a huge disconnect because our local taxpayers think we have so much more money. The reality is we don't. We just have more money from you.
We
We
just
have
get
less.
so much.
Yeah. And so our big push has been, how do we get the state to approve and authorize additional funding per student? I'm fine with tax compression. I mean, that's great for our local taxpayers, and it's well deserved because they've been flipping the largest part of this bill for a long time. But at the same time, you can't ignore the fact that things cost more today than they did even back in 2019. And so the state really needs to focus in on, what is the true cost of education, and make sure that the amount of money we can generate per student is adequate. That's the bigger question. As far as who's paying for it, the 50-50 split seems to be, most people can agree that that's pretty fair. If we have 50% coming from our local taxpayers and 50% from the state. But the bottom line is we need to look at how much money it's cost to educate a student today. And with all the needs that they're coming to us with, it's not the same as it was 20 years ago. And then just the cost of doing business is a whole lot different today compared to what it was just 3 years ago.
Preach that. So I think we kind of addressed number 10, 2 to 3 concerns about current state funding. I could probably elaborate and figure that out. We talked about the new compressed tax rate, revenue funding. Anything specific about that? I mean, for House Bill 3 for public schools in Texas, just that it seems as though it's all controlled, right? So like you can only go up so much, and then you have to roll back, or you have to take it to a vote to not be more than this. And that was all. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, that was, you got it right. It's really just remember the property values are what's driving a lot of these changes that the state's making. It's just value growth has been so significant that the the compression pieces of it were just there to help rebalance who's paying for education and get
Mhm.
the state's share back up to what
Right.
was historically deemed appropriate.
Okay. Okay, do you have this is named in this class, the 2023 summer submission superintendent report? Do you know what that is?
I do. Yeah. Do you have the access to that one, Jason? Or we can get through it on Data Suite? We-
Looking in our pings folder.
Yeah. We can.
Is that
Oh,
public, or is that like something I shouldn't be able to see?
It's fine for you to see it. It is an internal document. It's one that we submit to through our PEEM submission.
Okay,
But it is a very useful report. And
They
so
they have mid-year out there. They don't have summer in our finance drive.
Brad Frable would have that if you want to
Okay.
request it from him.
okay. And overall, this is a valuable, I'm assuming it summarizes the year
Yeah.
or?
It's going to give you
Okay.
your population counts for your
Okay.
enrollments, your basic ADA, your different classifications and counts of special needs students, your
Oh, okay.
at-risk populations, your language, pre-introduced. It gives you all of your student demographics that go into calculating the revenue in the template that we can earn if they showed up 100% of the time.
There's that, because it's based on day.
Yeah, it's based on them showing up on the ADA.
Okay, all right, thank you guys. Okay, so I'm assuming these codes 11, 21, that's like your operations, right? Like 11 is supplies, or I don't know, I could probably go find
Yeah.
it, but
11's in your classroom. That's your basic instructional programs.
okay,
21 is your instructional leadership, which is more like your teaching and learning staff.